Yo, what is going on? PartTimerZack here. In today's video, we're going to be doing our 100-day review for Punishing Gray Raven. I wanted to kind of talk about this since we just hit the milestone for 100 days on the release of Global and kind of give it from two different perspectives. So I wanted to talk about from a player's perspective, but also kind of talk about it from a content creator's perspective, right? Because a lot of people have started to see content creators taking longer breaks or even kind of quitting the game entirely. And I kind of wanted to talk about what kind of goes into that and my perspective overall, why people are taking breaks or just generally kind of quitting overall as content creators. But first and foremost, I wanted to talk about from the player's perspective and kind of go from there. So as a player, just somebody who jumps in and kind of plays day to day, I'm not always thinking about how I'm going to make videos or how I'm going to create content. Sometimes I'm just logging in, playing it. Maybe I'm grinding for a certain thing just like you guys are. And I've started to kind of understand the stuff that's starting to kind of wear on me a little bit more than I thought it was going to. So initially, back when everything first kind of started, I thought I wouldn't have really a problem with the grindy kind of stuff and the repetitiveness of jumping into like an event, grinding for a material, and then taking that currency and exchanging it in the shop for like materials or event memories and stuff like that. But I've started to understand that it's a little bit more of a tedious task for me as we're kind of going into the next event, and then all the other different events, how they're kind of structured in a very, very similar way. And it's starting to kind of wear on me to a point where it's not exactly a chore, but it seems like more of an afterthought whenever I think about the game. And I honestly have to start to be kind of in the mood to do a lot of the different things that, you know, it requires to jump in here. I know it takes like 10-15 minutes, especially since they kind of added the stack stuff where you kind of do things in waves. You get to a point where you're like, okay, there's a couple different enemies, cool, but you're still going through kind of the motions of kill, attack, and it really just starts to seem like, okay, what am I kind of going for? Yes, I'm working on my units. Yes, I'm working for the currency for the event shop, but it's like, is this kind of just the way it's going to be forever? So obviously it's stuff like the roguelite was kind of a breath of fresh air because you were able to kind of go through a couple different things, still get your event currency, but it felt a little bit more fresh and you're able to kind of work with it. Honestly, I would rather start to see stuff like that for the main event instead of having to go through here and grind missions. I know a lot of people would rather just have it simplistic. Maybe you just like going through it because it's easy. It's easy to run through here, grind through the mission, get your currency, and move on. Maybe you don't really want to make all those choices that the roguelite has, or you don't really have to go through all the motion. But honestly, I kind of need something to keep my brain engaged, because whenever I go through it and I'm just like, you know what, I could just like not go through it today and I would be perfectly fine. There are days where I kind of just pass on playing the game in general because I just don't really feel like playing it. I kind of feel regret for the fact that I'm missing out on some currency that day, but honestly, I'm just like, you know, whatever. I don't really care too much when it comes to like skipping out a day or two. So I won't take like too long of a break, obviously, because there's only so many days in the event, but I feel like I'm just starting to kind of get wore out a little bit more and more. And I don't necessarily know if this is going to be increasing as the next event's kind of coming, or if I'm just going to kind of go through a spurt here where I'm like, whatever, and then I kind of get back into it. But honestly, as a player right now, I can definitely understand why a lot of people are saying it's a little bit more repetitive and why it's a little bit slower. I'm not trying to say that the game is like bad in any way, but the fact is that it so closely like resembles CN that there's not a lot of wiggle room. Even as somebody like a content creator who's able to kind of talk to Kiro Games on some basis, you can't really persuade them to do anything different because obviously they have a timeline, they have something that they're kind of following. And I know a lot of people think that having CN is a good thing, seeing as you can kind of see into the future, you know what units, you know what teams, you know what to kind of save for. And that is definitely a really cool thing, especially when it comes to BC and being a free-to-play player. That is definitely a benefit to being able to save all that kind of stuff. But the backlash to that, or kind of like the flip side double-edged sword, is going to be the fact that it has to kind of follow a trend. And you'll see kind of this stuff happen with some of the features that they implement that you know that there's kind of a better version of. Just example like the lock-on thing, where it had to kind of go through the crappy version, I would say, before we got to internal engine where they fixed it. Even though they knew that there was a fix for it or a better version of it, they still implemented the kind of crappy version because it has to follow the timeline of CN. And so obviously those things are kind of minor, but when it comes to the fact that like you can't really change the way that these events kind of go, so you have to go through some of these boring events to get to some of the better ones that CN did, because eventually they found out that, you know, in CN that these events were a little bit slower, and so they started to improve them and started to make them a little bit better. And it kind of sucks as a global player because you have to kind of watch how fun CN is, or kind of like see some of the different events that they have and kind of be like, God, I gotta wait like a year to get to a point where I have to play that, so I have to play all the way up until this point to even get to a point where that is. So even if you wanted to take a break, you were missing out on tons of stuff. So like if you took a break on Eternal Engine, you may miss Espianca, which is kind of a key point for a lot of different things down in the future. Or like Ice, Lucia, you might end up missing her. Say you take a break in the next 2 months, and then you end up missing on a CN meta essentially for Ice. And it kind of just sucks because you know that you can't really take a break, but you don't necessarily know what else to do because you're kind of getting burnt out. And that is kind of where I'm at with the game overall as just a player. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is being a content creator, because I've seen a lot of people taking breaks. I've seen a lot of people talking about other content creators taking breaks, and a lot of people asking what it looks like as a content creator's perspective. and what it looks like going into the game. So whenever I'm jumping into the game and I'm actually thinking about what kind of content I can make, unfortunately, it started to kind of slow down a little bit since the first couple of additions to the events, because I feel like the events are getting more simplistic. It's starting to get more easier to understand. And obviously that's a good thing from a player's perspective, because you don't have to think too much about jumping in here. You just know exactly what missions to grind. You don't have to worry too much about anything else. But as a content creator, that kind of sucks a little bit, because my guides are starting to become more simplistic, meaning that they're going to become more and more like useless essentially when it comes to like the general player, especially people who have been playing since day one. They're not going to really have to refer too much to a guide. Maybe they jump on and they're like, okay, what slot do I need for my memories? And if there are some variations to the stage, which one's a little bit better than the other one? And then, you know, that's just kind of it. Other than that, there's not really a lot to talk about, and there's not really a lot to go on when it comes to guides. And a lot of the content around Punishing Gray Raven is starting to evolve into more of like, how high can you get on Warzone, or, you know, how high can you do the Tower of Babel, and just having more of like a fun type of thing, which, you know, that's great for a lot of content creators. But some of us have like this kind of thing where we like to kind of make guides, or where we like to kind of talk a little bit more about the game. And we're going to start to see less and less of that. I kind of feel like when it comes to the way that the community develops and they start to understand, like, this is just it, this is the bread and butter, this is how we go, and content creation is going to be lacking a little bit. And even right now, I'm starting to see kind of a slowdown in Punishing Gray Raven when it comes to like views and all that kind of stuff. And obviously I'm not driven fully by views, but whenever I start to see the community engaging a little bit less with like Punishing Gray Raven videos, or just content in general about Punishing Gray Raven, I start to understand that maybe people are just getting to the gist of everything that kind of goes into the game, and they don't really care too much to see anything else, because you've probably seen a lot of stuff around Warzone, Pain Cage, and now even Tower of Babel being the second edition essentially since the last event, that a lot of people just kind of covered it. And you're like, okay, well, I've seen some people get some pretty good scores, that's cool and all, but at this point it's becoming less and less impressive, because honestly it's just kind of the thing that I've already seen, and I can definitely understand that. So whenever it comes to an event, essentially I have like 3 or 4 good videos at the very beginning of the event, and then it starts to kind of taper off, and you start to kind of try to find something else to talk about. And for me anyway, I just can't really make filler content, and so I usually just don't try to do that. I just try to make stuff that I feel is relevant, and I make content whenever I feel like it has something to kind of give back to the community, or it has some sort of like face value, essentially when we're doing like the gauntlet with Espianca and kind of showcasing what it looks like for that character to be fully maxed out. But after that, there's not really much to talk about. I kind of have to wait and go through the slow paces, which I feel like every gacha game kind of has this. So I'm not really bashing totally on Punishing Gray Raven as a content creator. It just kind of sucks when it comes to the fact that stuff is starting to slow down. And I kind of feel like that's going to be a little bit more prevalent going into the next couple of months. And then it's going to start ramping up a little bit more as we go into other, you know, events and stuff like that, that engage and open up a little bit more. But as a content creator right now, I really understand why a lot of people are either taking breaks or they're just kind of quitting entirely. I feel like the game is starting to become a little bit of a chore, and there's just honestly not too much to talk about as a content creator going into like guides and stuff. And it really feels like I'm just kind of telling you guys similar information from the last event, and, you know, I'm putting it on Excel, and I am doing the time and effort to kind of go through here and kind of showcase everything that I can. But especially with like an event like Internal Engine, it was really hard to make a guide on it, because honestly it was pretty self-explanatory for the most part. The only like real kind of hard thing was talking about the authority level and essentially how that kind of escalates and goes through, and how many, you know, limits you have from that. But honestly, it's just become a little bit more simplistic. So overall, I know that this is kind of just like a gotcha thing where a lot of things go through a lot of slow periods. So I definitely understand, but it's really hard as a content creator, especially one that kind of dives into Punishing Gray Raven so much, to make kind of like daily accessible content to you guys. So my biggest fear is the fact that it's gonna like kind of taper down to a point where it's like literally just at the beginning of the events that's kind of the only content that I make around Punishing Gray Raven, and then we kind of just talk about a different game up until the next Punishing Gray Raven event. And that's just kind of how it's going to be for a little bit. I'm hoping that there's a spark somewhere where I'm able to kind of find something else to do, but I can definitely understand why people are lacking the content, or even as a content creator trying to struggle to find what can kind of be accessible to the community and what's going to be kind of valuable as well, because it is at the end of the day just kind of something that like maybe it's entertainment. You watch Warzone or we watch some of the Pain Cage stuff and you're kind of like entertained by that, but that kind of wears off a little bit as you kind of go through it. But anyway, that's just kind of my 2 cents. I think overall the game is really great. I think it's a lot of fun. It just kind of sucks because I feel like the potential for the game is kind of lacking a little bit, since the fact that it has to follow CN so closely, and there's not really a way to branch out a lot. So it just seems like, you know, you kind of know where you're going, the path is clear, and a lot of people like that. But at the same time, it's like, you know, you're never surprised by anything. And there's a lot of like, bam, I just know exactly what's going to happen. I know exactly where I'm going to go. There's nothing really going to be added, maybe exclusive memory here and there, but overall I know exactly what I'm getting and exactly where I'm going. And so you can kind of research into the future and kind of know what to save for and kind of go from there, which is definitely a great thing for a lot of players. But as a content creator, it kind of sucks because you're like, well, you know. So overall, I don't really plan on quitting or anything. That is not the point of like the end of this video or anything. It's just kind of telling you guys the other side of it, the perspective of a content creator. I'm probably just going to taper it back a little bit and just kind of give more relevant information and not try to make too much filler, and just kind of go from there and kind of see how Punishing Gray Raven kind of develops as it goes into more of the events, and kind of seeing what we can kind of come up with and kind of get ideas for. But anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it there. Have a good rest of your night, guys. Peace.